Hey guys, and welcome to a new video. Today, an update on the Bleed Pale Gladiator. Tornado shot, that is. And I ditched it. Okay, so main reason for that is the hyper lack of single target. So basically, the main idea was to make like an impale gladiator that I explained in the last video, using tornado shot as its own ability, basically for both clearing and a single target. Therefore, I managed to make the links that it only has like one supportive gem for clearing, which is GMP, greater multiple projectiles, to have like a wide area spread, right? But I wouldn't really say that GMP for tornado shot is a decreasing single target ability. It's actually higher in your single target since you have more projectiles that can possibly hit the single target, right? Unless, like, for example, on the Bleed character, for example, right? We have like Fork, we have like Chain, for example, right? And then with GMP and Mirage Archer, you have like four support gems that are actually lowering your DPS, but just adds shit tons of area of effect. So you would normally go like tornado shot, like chain, fork, Rigwolds, like whatever, you know, and then have a separate barrage single target setup to make up for this area of effect. So you have two skills, clearing and single target. What I wanted to do is making an impaled character that is only using tornado shot. So I'm going to say the clearing was insane. Like I could literally just run through the map on tier 16. Tornado shot is clearing like a madman. We know that. It's like one of the best skills in the game for clearing, especially when you pair it up with like chain, fork, Rigwolds and whatnot, and massive amounts of projectile speed now with the revamp, and just additional projectiles. But for single target, I'm not gonna lie, it is one of the worst things I've ever seen for the... I wouldn't really say the lower budget of sites, because I actually spent quite some currency, like 20x or so, but I needed like about 30 seconds to kill a map boss in a tier 16 map on Awakener 8, right? So I did not even bother trying out the Conquerors or trying out the Saurus or something. If I take 30 seconds for a map boss, you can translate that how it looks like against actual Guardians and bosses in total. So instead of like ditching everything, I decided to try out something unique that is possible in this league thanks to replica items. So if we say Bleed, how does Bleed scale? You know my Bleed Gladiator from last league, that was my league starter, a very, very successful build. Let's turn off here the aspect so we actually can see the MTX, looks pretty cool. So the way you scale Bleed is like obviously increased bleeding damage, right? For the total amount of damage done, it's like Bleed duration. For the higher DPS, but the same amount of damage done each bleeding, we have damaging ailments deal damage faster, such as found as, for example, on the cleaving node, which says like bleeding you inflict deals 15% faster. This is not really highering your total damage done, but it's increasing your DPS, right? So just think about if you have 10 million DPS with one single bleeding. Let's say it does 2 million DPS, but lasts 5 seconds, right? So we have like 5 ticks basically with 2 million, right? This is a one bleed, so you have 2 million DPS, but for one bleeding, it's 10 million damage if we say that our bleed is 5 seconds long. So what if you do, if you have like 10% faster bleeding, it means that your duration is not 5 seconds, it's like 4 point something, but therefore your DPS is not 2 million, it's like 2.5 million, for example, right? You have a higher DPS, but for the total amount of bleed, it's the same damage. It's just having a reduced duration but higher DPS, so it sums up for the same. So all that bleeding damage deals faster does is it ramps up your DPS quite heavily, right? But if you say like one bleed, how much damage does it do? You can have 100% increased faster damage of bleeds. It will still deal the same damage, just in a way shorter amount of time. So if you permanently keep your bleedings on the target, then it's a lot more DPS, okay? Good. What other sources are there? Damage over time multiplier and physical damage over time multiplier. These are the things that are like found on like cluster jewels, for example, or on the tree over here. There's like multiplier is one of the best sources of increasing your DPS next to like getting higher base damage, for example, with a nice bow and stuff, right? But you're like limited on that one, right? In the skill tree, there's like a couple nodes here with the line as fall. You could convert those nodes, but at some point you're like limited to that. And the natural reason for that, or what to do next, is get just super tanky, right? But there is another way of increasing your DPS quite heavily, and this is something usually Poison Assassins use, and this is Perfect Agony. So what Perfect Agony does is basically making, I would say, 2 different bleeds, you know? Like, usually crits does not apply to bleed, doesn't matter, you know? So if you crit or non-crit, the bleed damage is the same, right? It just doesn't affect it, unless you have the Perfect Agony keystone, which says modifies your critical strike multiplier. This is the one that you find on quivers, for example, on the bow, rings, whatever. Global critical strike multiplier we're talking about, the one that you're using for crit builds, basically Lacerate or Cyclone or like any kind of crit build, whatever, Stonebrand, you know? Sorry. Modifiers to critical strike multiplier also apply to damage over time multiplier for ailments, bleed is an ailment, from critical strikes at 50% of their value. So what does that basically mean? What that means is if you have Perfect Agony, you have 2 bleeds, okay? Not stacks of bleeds, you only have 1 stack unless you go Crimson Dance, we know of that. But we say we have 2 bleed sources, right? A non-crit bleed and a bleed crit. And if you crit, you know, you actually need critical strike chance on your bow, you have like a diamond, like there's the typical crit based build, right? Once you crit with your attack, it will calculate all your damage over time multiplier that you have, like global damage over time multiplier and so on, or basically the damage over time multiplier here, and we'll split this in half. But it gets counted as a damage over time multiplier, so it affects your bleeding now, right? So I was playing a crit bleed version, like I would say like 2 leagues ago or something, maybe 3 leagues ago, but it wasn't really good, you know. I had like, let's say 20% more damage than the actual non-crit, but for way more investment, since just think about it. How do you need to path out as a duelist, right? You probably have to go up here, going through the reflexes, and going here to Perfect Agony, right? So there's like, I don't know, like 10 or 15 or maybe even 20 skill points that you need that doesn't give you anything just to get the Perfect Agony. And that result is you actually have more DPS, that is true, but you lose so much life and defense layers just because you're missing like 15 skill points. That could all be life or even more damage based on cluster jewels, for example, right? But if that works, like, that was just not a real good way, right? But now we have this one here, the Replica of Atziri'S Acuity. And it says, like, usually Acuities is if you you have Val Pact if you've crit recently, right? But the Replica says you have Perfect Agony if you deal a critical strike recently. So that made me think, wait a second, we do have a Pharaoh's for the Replica for my Endurance and Frenzy Charge generation to have permanent Outmatch and Outlast active, you know. But the thing is, now I can actually have Perfect Agony without skilling it and go for a critical based bleed build. And this is kind of very unique, and I was like very interested. I was sitting like, I don't know, like 8-9 hours just trying to make different builds working with Perfect Agony with the Equities, and I ended up making it as a bleed bow gladiator, just as a crit bleed bow. So the way this works, as I said, you have like 2 bleeds, right? You want to have critical strike chance and critical strike multiplier. And the difference here is you need critical strike chance will actively boost your bleed DPS, while the critical strike chance is actually not increasing the bleed, but just like PoB, or basically when you're fighting, you know, it's not like you have one shot and that's it, you know. So basically what the critical strike chance does is it highes the chance that you're critting, and therefore enabling your critical bleed that you get from the Perfect Agony thanks to the increased damage over time multiplier and stuff like that, right? So you need critical strike chance, critical strike multiplier, in addition to your damage over time multiplier, and bleed deals faster. So what that means is we have now a way higher and bigger form of scaling our damage. You know, while the non-crit, the RT version of the Bleed Bow Gladiator is like quite limited when it comes to that, we now have like endless scaling, right? I know the items are getting more expensive anyways, because now we don't even have to like focus on the usual things. We can also add crit and crit multiplier. But how does the damage look like, right? This is more like of an assassin pathing. Like, remember with the bleed bow, I was pathing out on the left side, going over here, taking all the life nodes possible. But now I decided to go to the right side and taking all the shadow starting area, because we have here crit strike chance, multiplier, here life, here we have physical damage, critical strike chance, here we have multiplier, here we have King of the Hill with shit tons of critical strike chance for bow. So we are actually playing an on-hit crit bow build now, with the bleedings affecting way higher. So I was making a path of building. I don't really want to show too much of it, not of the gear or anything, because it's actually ridiculous gear on this character, right? But at the moment with this build, so not the one that I'm currently playing, this is just like completely crafted in path of building, you know, like just some rings as placeholders like fizz damage, whatever, vulnerability. There is like a lot of things not even getting calculated in, such as the, what is it called, the alternate quality gems, for example, right? The vulnerability doesn't get calculated in, so all I had to do is like getting a curse on hit ring and just add a vulnerability with cost of damage taken, this, so it doesn't have a doom effect, so because it's triggered, right? This is just as a placeholder for my ring that I have here with like a synthesized vulnerability on hit, right? And with the change of vulnerability, that the enemies not only take more physical damage, so also bleedings and poisons, I think, deal 20% damage faster, which is also a nice DPS increase, right? But yeah, seeing it like that, this is actually, I just, for fun, I put in the best bow that is currently on the market, also like 3 mirror or something, right? If I would take like any crafted bow, this is a 350 DPS bow with just like flat fizz, percent fish. There's not even crit strike chance on it, right? And it's also the wrong base here, right? We still have well over 10 million bleed DPS with one single puncture, right? And this is not Crimson Dance, and this is not a Salem or something like that. With a Salem, we're probably gonna have like, yeah, ridiculous amounts of damage. But here with the mirror tier bow, I would have like 15 million bleed DPS. I think the highest bleed DPS that I ever had was like 9 million using the Asylum. This is not Asylum and has 15 million DPS with a 90% critical strike chance and only basically 274% multiplier. But in the end, you have to think about half of that multiplier is added as damage over time multipliers. It is like 138% or 137% damage over time multiplier if I crit, and I have 90% chance to crit, right? So this is like the current project that I'm working on, and the character in the current state, using like my poor crafted bow here with like, how much DPS did I have? Like 290 DPS or so. With some actually very mediocre gear here, still having the leveling belt because I was needing resistance, right? The Acuities, the Replica, going for 15 chaos. So the only expensive thing here in this build at the moment is the Replica Forest 4, what I think is not needed. I wouldn't say at all, because it still makes you not focus on your endurance and frenzy charges, and you're always going to have the 10% more damage and the reduced physical damage taken, which I personally really like. You know, you can still go with the old route, taking an explode chest or taking any life chest that you might need, you know. And yeah, other than that, it's like a little bit chaos spammed, like the rings, like a bit of life and I don't know, like really trashy items basically, right? Just to get myself res capped, right? We could run a map. I think it's a little bit lagging just because I just deleted my cache folder. So I would say map prep. Are we going to do a Phoenix? Ally weakness. Let's make it a little bit easier here, because yeah, my gear is not that great yet, right? Physical damage reduction should actually not matter, since the bleed damage is getting calculated before the actual on-hit damage, so physical damage reduction shouldn't do anything. If you're interested in the bleed bow itself, like this was my League Starter last league, was actually very successful, like insanely successful, both in like League Starter and how people liked it. It's basically the same. We're using Split Arrow as my clearing skill, currently at the 5 link, and Puncture as my single target, using Ensnaring Arrows so the enemies count as bleeding and therefore take like, I don't know, like shit tons of more damage, right? Clearing wise, we have like the alternate quality of Split Arrow, which gives it 1 additional projectile, which I don't know, like is not really necessary, because like Split Arrow has already like insane amounts of projectile. But hey, we're using Chain, we're using Fork, and this is just to get this bleeding on, right? So it doesn't really matter at all. if you have like increased damage on your split arrow and whatnot, we will have enough damage for clearing anyways, right? So I just thought like, hey, one more additional projectile is one more projectile that can chain, is one more projectile that can then fork and stuff like that. So, holy shit, we should be able to get some nice more damage, right? Or at least clearing in that case. So, let's open this. I don't even know how my single target on Guardians is like. But as I said, I've already done all the Conquerors and Saurus and Awakener 8 already with this build in the current state. And it has been an absolute pleasure, and knowing, like literally knowing how much of an increase I can still get out of that character, right? I probably have like 2 or 3 million DPS, and I could potentially, if everything goes well with like crafting, and let's assume I would have mirrors, right, at some point of the league, I could get probably up to like 15 to 20 million bleed DPS, which is like one single puncture will kill Saurus in the last phase, right? It's ridiculous. So we're going to go into the blood stance in the end, just getting off, like activating flasks. I actually tanked that. I don't know if this is good or bad. Like, good that I survived it, I think, but kind of bad that I'm bad enough to actually tank it. Like, just don't get hit, you know? Golden rule in PoE. But yeah, it's just running around, getting your totems down, like, just spam your puncture, and once you... Holy shit, once you get, like, a very nice bleeding off, you will instantly notice that, because the boss will, like, instantly, or at least, like, very fast die. So on Awakener 8, these bosses do have quite some... quite some life, I would say. I have, like, 8 debuffs already. Okay, good. Blade did the rest. This is why sustained DPS is just better than on-hit DPS. So think about it. You have a Cyclone with 10 million DPS, right? And as soon as you stop Cycloning, you have 0 DPS. While my bleed will still be on the target even if I have to dodge. Like the last 3 seconds of the fight, I was just trying to survive, and Phoenix just died out of bleeding, right? And yeah, as I said, Awakener 8. I don't know if there was like any other things on it. Doesn't really matter in the end, right? I would say my gear at the moment is probably about 25x, I would say, if even. I'm not even sure, because the chest alone is 15x if it's 6-link, right? So this one is expensive, but the rest of my items is like leveling item. This is 12 chaos. This is a bow that I crafted today with a couple of what is it? Corroded and jagged fossils. The helm is like chaos spend for life and cold resistance. That I have that as well. Like some mana reservation, you know. No, like there is nothing insane on this build, right? Here I have a Transcendent Flash that helps me with the accuracy, right? But there is no Watcher's Eye. I'm even missing jewel slots over here. So I'm just like super interested in this build because I personally know how much I invested into this build. Knowing where is the limit, and there is no limit. The more currency you get, the more insane this character will turn out, and I would say I'll keep you updated in the upcoming days on how this character will turn out in the end, and I'm actually going to try out the Reign of Errors as well at some point just to see the difference to Split Arrow on this part. But yeah guys, thanks for tuning in, thanks for watching, and see you on the next video.